I took the night watch on my uncle's cattle ranch outside Fort Stockton because the calves were dropping early that March and the coyotes had been testing the fence. The date sticks with me, March 11th, because the weather couldn't make up its mind. At sundown, it was a crisp 62, the kind of clean desert cool that carries the smell of cedar all the way from the creek bed. By midnight, warm air slid in from the south, and the wind that had been fidgeting with the mesquite seemed to lie down and hold its breath. The sky was clear, a slow spill of stars, and the only noise was the creak of the windmill and the low, practical sounds of animals doing what they do at night. I parked the ranch truck by the calving shed, left the engine off, and walked the fence line with a thermos of coffee and a tired flashlight that had to be smacked twice to keep the beam steady. Remembered the ordinary things because they were anchors. The tinny rattle of the gate chain, the crunch of caliche under my boots, the way the ground still stored the day's heat just beneath the crust. My aunt kept a ribbon of blue cloth on the corner post so she could spot the turnoff from the county road. It fluttered once and then flattened. Still no wind. Somewhere toward the far pasture, a heifer coughed that wet, impatient cough they get when a storm's coming, even when the weather radio is quiet. I texted my uncle, all good, and got back a thumbs up and the kind of old man advice he likes to send at 12:07 a.m. Coyotes are cowards until they're not. Strange signs didn't come like thunder. They came like a zipper being pulled across the night. First, it was the windmill. It stilled. No squeak, no groan, just stopped. The fan blades cutting a steady shape against the stars, so still I thought my eyes were watering. Then the cattle quit shifting. They didn't lay down, they froze standing, heads tilted toward the creek, ears forward, bodies stiff. A calf bleated, one sad, half-hearted note, then nothing. I could hear the pool of water in the galvanized trough settle, the tiny lap of it finding its level. I don't know why I whispered, "Hey," as if I might embarrass the night into moving again. I walked toward the creek, past the house line where the porch light throws that buttery circle onto the dust. The dog, Hank, didn't bark. He watched me with his mouth open, tongue dry, not panting, not wagging, just watching, and that felt wrong. When I crossed into the pasture, the smell changed. The cedar and dust scent was gone. In its place came something like the inside of a rusted pipe, like old coin sucked on by a child. Iron, not blood iron. It sat on my tongue, heavy and metallic, as if the air had thickened into a thing that could stain. Halfway to the creek, my flashlight died. It didn't fade. It snapped off, leaving a bright memory across my eyes and then a darkness that wasn't just the absence of light, it was something present, like someone standing in the door of a room you thought was empty. My phone light worked, but it felt small. The beam shook because my hand shook, but I kept walking. I told myself it was a busted transformer somewhere or a UFO video I'd laugh about later. The pasture grass whispered against my jeans, but it wasn't wind. It was something like breath moving through the stems. A slow inhale dot at the creek. I found the blue tarp we use for calving emergencies, folded, tied, placed on the bank like a gift set down by careful hands. None of us had left it there. We stored it in the shed. I checked the knots. They were new, tight, not the sloppy loops my uncle ties with 2 fingers and a curse. There were hoof prints, yes, but they were oddly precise, like a neat line of punctuation moving into the water and vanishing where the slow current drank them. I crouched and touched the mud. It was cold, not night cool, but refrigerator cold, and the iron smell brightened, as if I'd cracked a seal. I heard a voice then. It wasn't some ghostly whisper. It was my uncle's voice, coming from downstream, calling in his matter-of-fact way. "Hold the light." The words were ordinary, scolding, like he always is if you're not doing exactly what he expects. I stood, relieved enough to laugh, and shouted, "Over here!" The cattle behind me lifted their heads higher. No other sound followed, so I started along the creek. Phone light skittering over stones slick with algae. The beam catching on tiny eyes in the bank toads, motionless, shining back at me with a glum patience that made me feel like I'd interrupted a meeting. "Hold the light," my uncle said again, same tone, same distance, like a recording. I hurried, and the air got colder, and the iron taste got stronger until it made my jaw ache. I reached the low place where we sometimes drive across in drought years. Someone had set 3 fence posts in the water, evenly spaced, each wrapped at the top with a strip of that same blue cloth from the corner post. And the wind I'd been missing came back all at once, but not from any direction. It rose from the water as if the creek were exhaling, and the cloth twisted in a way that didn't match the gusts, each ribbon curling toward me like fingers asking, like old men saying, "This way, son." I said my uncle's name and got "hold the light" yet again in reply. The same cadence, the same distance. The cattle lowed in dissonant harmony, a long, panicked complaint. "Where are you?" I shouted. The ribbons pulsed. Something moved in the dark beyond my light's range, no shape. Just an absence moving through absence, displacing it like a fish in murk. The dog barked then. One hoarse bark from far behind me, and broke the spell just enough that I stepped back. My heel found the slick edge of the crossing, and I windmilled my arms to keep from going down. My phone light jolted across the water and landed on something at the far bank. The blue tarp again, folded, tied, pristine, as if it had always been there. I ran. I don't remember turning. I don't remember the cattle starting to move again or the windmill's blades creaking awake. I remember the dog's nails scrabbling on the porch as he backed away from me when I reached the house, tail down, body angled to keep me in view. Inside, my aunt was at the kitchen table with her Bible and a pencil she uses to circle verses like, "They might move if she doesn't pin them." "He call you?" she asked without looking up. "Who?" I said, and my voice sounded wrong, too high. "Your uncle. He was in San Angelo with a sick cow. He'd left at 9 and sent a picture from the vet clinic at 11:30. Him grinning like he does when he's tired, a paper cup of coffee in his hand." I showed my aunt the blue ribbons tied at the tops of the fence posts by describing them. I couldn't make myself go back out to bring one in, and she set her pencil down and finally looked at me. "Don't go to the creek if there's no wind," she said, as if reminding me to turn off the lights when I left a room. It likes to practice with voices when the air's holding still. I stayed inside the rest of the night. The calves took care of themselves, or something else took care of them. In the morning, the tarp was back in the shed, folded the way my aunt folds towels, edges aligned, the kind of precise that makes you think of a hospital bed before it holds anyone. The blue cloth from the corner post was gone. We replaced it with a red one, and the wind hasn't stopped long enough since then for anything to borrow our voices. But sometimes on clear nights, when the air goes slack for a heartbeat, the cattle lift their heads all at once and look toward the creek, and I keep my lights pointed anywhere but there, because whatever it was asked me to hold the light, and I almost did. I spent a week in July helping a realtor friend get an old ranch house ready to list outside Uvalde. The house sat back off a county road behind a low cattle guard and a tunnel of live oaks, its tin roof wavy and tired. Its porch wide enough that you could line 3 rocking chairs and still have space for a dog to dream in the shade. The first day was normal in the way of hot days, a chemical sweetness from the cleaners we hauled in. The sound of cicadas sawing the afternoon into ribbons. The smell of sun-baked dust that comes up when you sweep a floor that hasn't been swept in months. I scrubbed the kitchen, opened stuck windows with my hip, and let the place breathe. By dusk, the air moved through the house in a reasonable way. Hot to cool, with no tricks. There was a single working bulb on the porch my friend had replaced it that morning, and it cast that cheap yellow light you only notice when moths find it. We sat under it with Whataburger cups sweating onto the railing and listened to the neighbors' steers, clack horns like lazy drunks. "You hear anything, text me," my friend said, keys already in her hand. "Neighbors say kids come out here and spook themselves." I nodded. I don't spook easy. I grew up in a trailer backed up to a fence line where javelinas felt entitled to the trash cans. But I still locked the door out of habit, and when I checked the deadbolt, I noticed it was new, the metal too clean for the scuffed wood. A memory bumped me then, a note in the listing file, a previous owner who'd moved out quickly. The first strange thing was the porch light. At 10, the moths thinned, their figures loosening from the glow until there were none, and the bulb didn't so much dim as go shallow. I stepped outside. The bulb burned, but its light didn't hit me. I held my hand up and couldn't see its shadow on the boards. The light existed in a very small sphere around itself and stopped right at the edge of the glass, like it had changed its mind about being useful. The darkness beyond the bulb felt almost personal, and I smiled because people from town say things like that and folks who live on ranches just shake their heads. I decided the fixture was cheap and the bulb bad and went back inside. The second strange thing was the radio. I'd left it on in the kitchen to keep the night from becoming too large. Oldies out of San Antonio, a DJ who liked to laugh at his own jokes. At 11, the music clipped mid-verse and returned with a half-second delay, enough to make every beat feel drunk. Then the DJ spoke, and the room swam with an echo of him, a softer, slower version behind the first, like a respectful brother following after. "Sometimes," the echo said. Not exactly his words, but riding his cadence. "The traffic doesn't make it home." I turned the radio off and the kitchen went blessedly quiet. So quiet that I heard the porch boards creak like a heel turning. I told myself it was raccoons and went to the front door. The porch light glowed like a candle. I could see the bulb, but not what it meant to show me. I stood there, hand on the knob, and felt a kind of hospitality that was not meant for me. The door was an in-between place, and the other side of it was a room where the furniture had been rearranged without asking. I opened it anyway because I am a practical man and because you can't fix a fear you won't touch. The night smelled like wet cedar, though it hadn't rained in weeks. That's the smell you get when a lot of leaves are breathing at you. There was a man sitting in the far rocking chair, or a suggestion of one. The light didn't bend to him. It broke, skidding off his outline. He rocked once, not toward me. He rocked like a person who was listening to a child trying to fall asleep. "Hey there," I said, the way you talk to a stranger who might be lost. He didn't look at me, and he did not look at me. His hat was wrong for now too tall, too stiff a shape I'd seen in photographs from a century ago. Beside him on the rail was a glass with a dark ring halfway up, the kind a cold drink leaves when it's been sipped to a predictable point. "You okay?" I asked. The porch board sighed, not under his weight, but under mine, and the sigh answered for him. "You are in the wrong place to be asking." I could have shut the door. Instead, I went to the light fixture. I unscrewed the bulb, hot on my fingertips, and held it up. With the light removed, the dark should have flowed in. It didn't. The glass held a dusky yellow, as if the bulb were still inside it, and in that not quite light, the rocking chair moved again. I heard ice in a glass shift and the smell of cedar leaned in. "Who are you?" I asked because sometimes names give people back to themselves. "I'm the one who comes when the porch light's the wrong kind," a voice said, not from the chair, but from everywhere the yellow should have fallen and didn't. "You borrowed it." I remembered then that my friend had taken the working bulb from a back room because she didn't have time to run to town. "Borrowed," I said. "We'll return it." The chair stopped. "If you return it," the voice said in a tone I recognized from church ladies who ask if you brought your casserole, "you return the rest." I thought about the new deadbolt on the old door, the note in the file about a previous owner who'd left suddenly, The way the air in the bedroom seemed cooler, like someone had left a window crack that I couldn't find. "What's the rest?" I asked. The answer was a scrape of wood in the back hall, a closet door moving, and a calf mew from somewhere too far away for a house. I went down the hall, and the closet had misbehaved itself, the door open, the coat swaying in a wind the rest of the house didn't feel. At the bottom was a shoebox, no lid, filled with old bulbs. Some still held a whisper of filament, the kind you can't buy now. Some were scorched black. The cardboard was damp, though my fingers came away dry. "Return it," the voice said, not impatient exactly, but sure. I took the box outside. The man in the chair had no face I could keep. Each time I looked, my eyes slid off him like oil off water. I set the box beside the rail. "Where?" I asked. The oaks answered, leaves clattering once, and then I saw the nail. A square nail set into the porch post at shoulder height, old and steady, the kind that remembers hands. I hung the working bulb on it, threaded through the brass base. The porch darkened a degree, like a cloud had passed across the face of the house. The glass on the rail was gone. So was the chair's small movement. From the pasture came a lowing, not distressed, but conversational, and the cicadas began again, picking up where they'd left off. I slept in the truck. In the morning, the bulb I'd hung on the nail was gone, and the box of dead bulbs had been pushed back against the wall, neatly centered, like an offering accepted. My friend laughed when I told her. "You spooked yourself," she said, but she didn't put a new bulb in the porch fixture. She brought in a lamp and set it just inside the window. "Looks homier anyway," she said. When the house finally sold, a little family moved in with a baby that cried like a kettle. I drove by in September. There was light on the porch, but it was the soft, generous kind that prefers faces. I don't borrow bulbs anymore, and when I leave a place, I try not to take the welcome with me. The ranch near Sonora, where I worked a spring branding, had 3 wire gates along the north boundary, each with a different personality. The first bit you if you grabbed too low, a strand kinked just right to leave a catfish mouth in your palm. The second liked to sag as soon as you unhooked it, daring you to try and lift it back without cussing. The third was easy, a gentleman's gate, closing with the soft, decisive click of a seatbelt. I was posted there with a radio and a list of numbers because the boss had a habit of counting people and cattle with the same suspicious energy and wanted a log of trucks. ATVs and strays. That morning was bright and honest. A little wind from the west, the smell of burnt hair already drifting from the pens, mixed with the sweet stink of iodine. A hawk rode a thermal over the draw and the ground glittered with flint chips in a way that makes you feel like you're standing in other people's history. Trucks came and went. I wrote numbers. My radio squawked. All the practical things that make a day feel like a day. Around 2. The light went flat the way it sometimes does in Texas, like the world closed its eyelids for a second and forgot to open them all the way. I checked my phone and it said what phones say: no service here, not even for ghosts. I'd taken to counting out loud when I unhooked the gate for a convoy, just to keep honest. 1, 2, and so on. So when I say I heard 6 that day, I mean I heard it in my own voice first, and then in a second voice a half beat behind me, matching my count but always 1 number late. The first time I decided it was an echo off the stock tank. The second time I decided it was the same. The third time I stopped deciding and listened. 3. I said for an ATV coming in hot, dust chasing it like a faithful dog. 4, the other voice said, pleased with itself, close enough at my shoulder I could feel the idea of breath. I swung around. No one stood there, which made sense because there is only room at that gate for you and the wire you're trying to keep from biting. I swallowed and waited for my heart to stop doing its own counting. The ATV idled through, rider nodding thanks. and I hooked the gate back with hands that felt like they'd been loaned to me by a less competent cousin. I told the boss over the radio I needed 5 minutes, and he said sure in that too laid-back tone he gets when he doesn't want to spook help. I walked the fence line east until the ranch shrank to the kind of quiet that gets inside your ear and taps on the glass. The barbs flashed their tidy little teeth. A jackrabbit watched me with judgment from the shade of a prickly pear, the air above its ears trembling in heat. I waited to hear anything that wasn't me. The world obliged by settling so completely that when a grasshopper clicked, it sounded like a slap. Back at the gate, a Ford I didn't recognize idled on the far side. Window down, driver's arm hanging out 10 and casual. "Heard we could cut through," he said. "People hear things." I unhooked the gentleman's gate. "1," I said in my normal way. "2," said the other voice, clean as a church bell, delighted to be included. The Ford rolled past. The driver didn't look at me. On the tailgate was a dent shaped like someone's boot. I watched dust blow off it in lazy puffs and had the urge to step in front of the bumper and tell the man to back up and leave the way he'd come. I didn't. The gate doesn't belong to me. 30 minutes later, the boss came by. He wanted head counts and reassurance, and I gave him both. "You look pale," he said, like an accusation against the day. "Shades thin," I said. He nodded at the gentleman's gate. "My daddy built that one wrong on purpose," he said, apropos of nothing. "So it'd always close. He didn't trust the wind to do the job." He drove off, and I held that sentence like a coin in my mouth until the metal taste wore out down at 4. 2 teenagers in a ranch truck I recognized only vaguely rolled up with a heifer trailing them, sullen about the rope. "We lost count," the passenger said, sheepish. "Been a day of it," I said. I opened the gate. "1," I said. "2," the other voice said, satisfied. The boys didn't hear it. The heifer put her head down and trudged through. As I hooked the chain, the voice, which was a part of my day now, like the sun and the radio, said 3, as if it was wrapping up a series, pleased to have tucked everything in. That was wrong. Only 2 things had passed, the truck and the heifer. "Who's 3? I asked the empty air, an idiot at his own party. The wind took the question and didn't bother to answer. I stood there long enough for the sky to develop a bruise in the northwest, one of those sudden summer storms rolling down like a shoulder. The first drop hit the brim of my hat, loud as a coin. 4, the voice said, low, contented, like a man who has counted his kids in the car and found none missing. I opened the gate without thinking and stepped back as if someone were coming. No truck appeared. No rider. The air cooled around my arms and the hair stood up like a field of wheat in a breeze. When the storm landed, it landed like it meant to stay. The rain came walking across the pasture, tall and indifferent, and the smell of mesquite went syrupy, the way it does when a drought is relieved. Through the water I saw movement, not a shape exactly, but the fact of something passing from one side to the other. 5, my double said, a little out of rhythm now, as if he were trying to guess when I'd speak next and wanted to beat me to it. I said nothing. Sometimes refusing a rhythm is the only control you get. The rain softened the ground, until the gentleman's gate stuck in the mud, the chain slick, my hands clumsy. Cars don't come when the road goes to soup, and nobody did. So I stood in the doorway of the little tool shed and watched the storm make a temporary privacy around the ranch. Out of that privacy came the Ford with the dented tailgate, moving slow, tires braided with grass. It should have been gone an hour ago, but it drifted into view like a thought you had earlier that now wants finishing. The window was still down. The driver's arm still hung out. His skin had the wrong shine to it, like he was too polished from inside. He smiled at me without showing his teeth and didn't stop. I opened the gate because that's what I do. 1, I said, because habit is a protection. 2, said the voice. The Ford crawled past. In the bed was nothing. In the bed was a lot of nothing, carefully arranged. The storm lost patience all at once and snapped its tent up, leaving behind the dripping hush that follows decisions. The boss called on the radio. "Shut it up," he said. "We're done." I hooked the gentleman's gate, flipped the loop double, and patted it like it was a dog. As I turned to the shed to grab my logbook, the voice spoke right in my ear, "No lag now. No playfulness. 3. And I felt something brush my sleeve, not a hand. A count, moving past me into the ranch like it had a place to be and was late for it. We branded 98 calves that day. The boss said it was a good number. The bunkhouse that night was fine. The next day was fine. But 2 weeks later, I heard a story about a Ford found half in a dry creek 20 miles away. The bed was full of something like water where there shouldn't have been any, and the tailgate was dented the way I remembered. They didn't find a driver. When I pass the gentleman's gate now, I count in my head wrong on purpose. If something wants to keep score, it can do the work without my help. August on my aunt's place near Blanco will teach you the geography of shade. You learn what moves and what doesn't, where a live oak holds its shadow like a gift and where the goat pen throws a rectangle of relief just wide enough for your boots. The well house sits beside the old stone tank, a squat cinder block room with a metal door that squeals like a gossip when you open it. My job was to prime the pump each morning in that heat wave so the sprinklers could keep the garden from giving up. Sunup to sundown was a griddle. Nights, the air cooled a little and then remembered it was August and came back mad about it. The first night, I noticed the well house was cold. Not cool cold like a walk-in. I opened the door expecting a gush of relief to spill out and slap my face. The opposite happened. The cold stayed inside, precise and bounded, like it had been told where to live and obeyed. My breath didn't fog. There was no damp. The concrete floor was just cold. I stood there longer than a person needs to stand anywhere. The pump thumped its steady heartbeat. The pressure gauge read what it should. I set my palm on the cinder block wall and felt the chill run up my skin as if I'd palmed a coin that had been in the freezer. On the second night, I brought a thermometer because naming something can make it manageable. 79 in the kitchen, 92 on the porch, 51 in the well house. 51 exactly, like the room had an opinion about its own comfort. I told my aunt, a woman for whom strangeness is a spice, not a meal. Old wells remember when water was a neighbor, not a resource, she said, tasting her tea like she could adjust the weather with a spoon. Don't sit in it. That kind of cold is a personality. The third night, the cold had a sound. Not a hum, that was the pump. Not a drip, the pipes were solid. It was a hush that came from the corner where the stack of empty feed sacks leaned, a hush that wasn't quiet, but the effort to be quiet. The way kids shush each other before a surprise. I crouched and peered between the sacks at the seam where the floor meets the wall. The light didn't go all the way down. The seam looked deep enough for mice, but the scent wasn't mouse. It was limestone wet from the inside. The way a cave smells when you're far enough in that the difference between brave and stupid is academic. I said, "Hello," because people say hello to things when they want to be the kind of person who says hello to things. The hush did nothing. The pump coughed. The thermometer on the shelf read 51. I left the door open a little to see if the cold would creep out and behave like physics. It didn't. The hot air outside butted against the threshold and lost interest. The cold inside stayed tidy and stubborn. At midnight, the goats sounded off, not panic, but annoyance, like someone had walked the fence line shining a light. I shut the door and pretended sleep until the night gave up and turned into morning. On the fourth night, my cousin came by with a flashlight and 2 lone stars. "I hear you got a haunted refrigerator," he said. We sat on overturned buckets, backs to the blocks, shoulders touching because that's how you borrow courage without naming it. "You hear that?" he asked. I did. The hush in the corner had found a rhythm, in and out, a quiet breath behind the wall that was not mechanical. "There's a spring under here," I said, because naming is still my first trick. "There's only Kalish under here," he said, because he has dug more fence posts than me. We opened the beers because it is an article of faith in my family that a cold thing is less frightening if you hold a cold thing of your own. Around one. The hush got company. A second sound ticked in the corner like a fingernail on glass, regular, unhurried, counting something we weren't part of. "Remember when Uncle Ray's dog wouldn't drink from the old tank after dark?" My cousin asked, voice low, as if the hush would pay attention to volume. "Dogs don't like their reflection at night," I said. He pointed at the thermometer. 51. Still. A moth hit the bulb overhead, pinged, and fell into my lap like a spent idea. I brushed it away and felt the tiniest puff of colder air when my hand passed through the space between the buckets. As if my gesture had dragged the edge of the cold like a sleeve dot, we decided to be stupid. We moved the feed sacks. Behind them, the seam was wider than it should be, an honest crack running the base of the wall, maybe 12 feet long, a hairline if hair were made of absence. From that crack, the cold rose not in a fog we could see, but in a certainty we could feel like the presence of a person in a dark room. The hush and the ticking both lived there, comforted by each other. "We should seal it," my cousin said, practical reasserting itself. And we went to the barn for quikrete and a pan and came back like men who know how to solve a problem. When the first trowel of wet cement touched the crack, the hush stopped. Not faded, stopped. The temperature on the thermometer nudged to 50. We smiled at each other, relieved to be men with tools. Then something knocked from the other side. Not a knock like wood. A knock like a ring against stone. Once, twice, 3 times. A cadence that felt older than us. My cousin's face did a thing I've only seen once. When he stepped on a rattler and didn't get bit, the satisfaction of being spared mixed with the horror of knowing you shouldn't have been spared. "Go get Aunt Ruth," he said, handing me the trowel like he was giving back a responsibility he didn't want anymore. My aunt came in her robe with her hair down, which made her look like a young woman in a painting of an old story. She put her palm flat on the wall and closed her eyes. "Don't cover a mouth," she said softly, and the sound in the corner sighed like it had been heard. We scraped the quikrete out with our fingers, gray under our nails, and the thermometer slid back to 51 with a kind of prim relief. "It's not ours," my aunt said. "It's passing through us on its way." She put the feed sacks back herself, neat and square, and told us to stop sitting in there like we were at a bus station. For 3 nights, I didn't go in. The sprinklers ran. The goats complained. The pump kept its heartbeat. On the 6th night, curiosity overrode manners, and I opened the door at 11 to peek. 51. The hush had softened, more like a draft in a chapel than a secret behind a wall. I set my hand on the cinder block and whispered I was sorry, not sure for what. The thermometer clicked to 50. I said I was sorry again, and it returned to 51. I left the door open a finger's width by accident and found it closed in the morning latched. Neat, like a host cleaning up after guests who don't know when to leave. We never sealed the crack. Winter came and the well house stayed 51. In February, my aunt found a note tucked under a rock by the tank, a grocery list from the 70s on a yellowed pad. The handwriting didn't match anyone we knew. Sugar, flour, bulbs. Bulbs underlined twice. The date at the top was a week after the old stone cistern had been capped. "Mouths," my aunt said again, not sad exactly. That night, the hush had a new detail, a woman humming. The tune impossible to keep, like the way you remember a melody but not where it starts. We left a glass of water on the floor by the sacks, and in the morning it was a degree warmer than the room. The cold is still there. It keeps its temperature like a promise. When August comes, the goats sleep against the outside wall, as close as they can get without being scolded. And sometimes I sit on the bucket outside the door with a beer and the kind of respect you learn late. There is nothing to be solved in that room. Only a boundary to be minded and a pace to be kept. 51 is a number I believe now. It is, for whatever passes under that corner, a kindness we are allowed to witness and not understand. It was calving season near Marfa, a dry April when the wind was thin and mean, peeling dust off the road cuts and throwing it against your teeth. We were moving a small bunch across a seasonal. Creek barely a crease in the pasture because the grass had come in. Better on the far side, and the boss liked the idea of a clean break between where they'd been and where they were going. The sky was hard blue, no clouds, the kind of day that makes you squint at the future and pretend it's simple. I was dragging a rope off the back of the four-wheeler and humming a bit of an old song, mostly to keep time with the machine. The creek wasn't water then, just sand damp a few inches down. A ribbon of lighter dirt that a careful person could follow to the cottonwoods and pretend that meant something permanent. We had a portable panel set up to narrow the crossing. Cattle don't like choices. They like momentum. Most of them moved as requested, hooves thudding down into the sand and lifting with that soft pop. But the last heifer refused. Ears back, eyes white, head low. She would come close and then swing wide like dancers do when they're avoiding the one man who steps on every foot. "Go ahead and push her," the boss said. And I tried, but there was a rightness to her refusal that made me slow up. You can feel when an animal is scared versus when an animal knows a thing you don't. I climbed off the four-wheeler, coiled my rope, and faced the creek like it had said something rude about my mother. The air above the sand shimmered a little, the way heat does, except the day wasn't hot yet. I crouched and touched the surface. It was cool. My fingertips came away damp and a little gritty, like a handshake with a careful bricklayer. I pressed harder and the sand compacted under my thumb with a small sigh. The boss doesn't like theatrics. He told me to cut the heifer out and bring her around to the road crossing an extra mile. It was sound advice, the kind that keeps a day from turning into a story. I started to do it. The heifer snorted, tossed her head, and stepped sideways, hooves landing exactly where mine had been a second before. The sand sagged and held her, and her body took a breath I could see. Behind us, the rest of the herd shifted and forgot about her, as herds do. Indifference is their survival elegance. That's when I saw the tracks. Not new tracks. Not old either. They were the shape of bare feet, small, heel and toe, pressed in a line leading from one cottonwood to another across the creek bed, as if someone had walked there when water was present and the creek had decided to keep the memory. Each print was filled with a darker sand, and the edges of them were too sharp for weather. I put my boot next to one. Mine looked rude. Mine looked like a boot. The heifer put her nose down, inhaled a long, considering inhale, and woofed as if the air tasted like a story she almost recognized. "Come on, girl," I said, useless. And she lifted her head and looked at me the way cows look when they see a fence you don't. Cow eyes are black and empty until they remember to be oceans. Hers did that, and I stepped back because I felt measured. The boss hollered something about the road crossing, and I waved without looking. The creek bed ahead of us changed color then, no dramatic shift, just a slow deepening of shade as if a cloud had passed exactly along its line. The wind, which had been saying its piece all morning, hushed to listen. I stepped into the bed because men do things they told themselves they wouldn't if it means not looking foolish. The sand under my boot compressed and held, and a cool rose through my sole that hurt my shin. 3 steps and the temperature dropped like a sentence ending. The air inside the line of cottonwoods felt like a room where someone had just said, "Don't," in a reasonable voice. I stopped because I am coachable. The heifer stopped too, just at the lip, as if we had reached the edge of an idea. Across on the far bank, the grass moved in a breeze the creek bed didn't share. The prints changed. I swear to you they did. The small bare feet deepened, as if whoever had made them had leaned their weight into a turn. A 4th print appeared that hadn't been there. The heifer blew a small question, and then a tiny soft sound came from somewhere among the cottonwoods, like a child chattering to themselves in a room where they've been left to play a while. It wasn't words. It was play. My throat closed. I said, "Hey," the way people say "hey" when they're interrupting a child who is concentrating. The sound stopped politely. I thought about the cattle that had already crossed. I thought about the way some things need to be left to their own lines. I took 1 step backward, and the cold eased its hand off my leg. The heifer leaned forward as if the pressure had gone off her chest. "We'll go the long way," I told her, and she turned without the drama she'd been using 10 minutes before, as if the decision had always been hers. I whistled to the boss and circled wide. He made a shape with his hands that said I was a coward and a genius in the same gesture. On the road crossing, the heifer walked through without a pause. The water there was puddle thin, and the sand had nothing to say. When we got to the far pasture, she went immediately to a spot under a hackberry and stood staring back toward the creek. Head turned, ears forward, as if waiting to be thanked for something she'd chosen not to do. That night, I came back alone because this is how I am. I stood at the same place in the cottonwoods and listened. The wind was back to normal wind. The temperature had the decency to be consistent. The prints were gone, or my eyes refused to keep them dot as I turned to leave. There was a splash deep down under the sand, not water, but the sound a bucket makes when it hits the top of a full well hollow satisfied. I thought of the child sound and of the way the heifer's breath had matched mine at the edge, and I felt the specific relief of being included and then let go. In the dark, heading to the truck, I passed the heifer in the pasture. She turned her head and exhaled a quiet question I had no way to answer. I told her "good girl" because we are simple around animals, and hoped she could translate that into the more complicated thank you we owed whoever keeps their feet light across the places we pretend are empty.